And just want to welcome everybody. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to everybody who's watching for tuning in. I'm Emily Conover. I'm the president of DCSWA, and I'm just gonna sort of read the name of the panel and hand it off to Kasha. So it's the topic is fostering diversity, inclusive mentoring of early career science writers, and Kasha Patel will moderate for us. And Kasha, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, thank you so much. My name's Kasha Patel. I am a digital storyteller, fancy term. I just write science at NASA. And I'm very excited to be moderating this panel. First off, shout out to Tina Say, who is a biology writer at Science News, for actually putting this together and asking each one of the panelists and myself to be part of this. So big thanks to her, because without her, I don't know if this would have happened. I'm excited about this panel because I think I talked to everyone on this panel in some capacity, but I don't think we've ever actually talked about this topic. So, it's not something that comes up in regular conversation. Now, on our panel, we have a great list of people. Nicholas St. Fleur. Oh, there we go. Nicholas St. Fleur, who is currently at STAT, but you probably know him from New York Times and The Atlantic. And he actually covers the intersection of race and medicine, focusing on health disparities. Next, we have Rodrigo Pérez Ortega, who is a science writer at Science, who also covers some diversity, equity, inclusion issues in his works. We have Jeff Mervis, who is a senior correspondent for Science and oversees the longstanding AAAS Diverse Voices internship. And then our last panelist, who currently looks like a phone, and you can see her phone number on here. So I guess if you have more questions, you know where to contact her, is Chanapa Tantibanchachai. And she is a press officer at the Food and Drug Administration. So the way that this is going to work is we'll each go through and kind of give you a little spiel about what they each do. Everyone has a unique experience in this topic, and then we will take Q&A. So if there are any Q&As that come up, please type them in, and we'll get to them. Rodrigo, how would you like to begin with us?
Sure. So yeah, I'm not sure what is expected from me really to talk about, but I don't know. I can talk about my experiences, which I can only say they have been great. And going through my experiences at different places in different newsrooms, I could point out certain things that had made them very pleasing. So I can say, before arriving at Science, I did an internship at Novel magazine. Was fresh magazine. I think it was about 2 years old when I arrived, based in Palo Alto, with Eva Emerson and Rosie Mestel. And now it's a much bigger staff, and I'm glad. Then I also did internships at Inside Science at the American Institute of Physics, then at Science, AAAS, and then Quanta from the Simons Foundation. So these are all, they're all magazines. I've also done internships at newspapers briefly when I was in grad school. But I think a key thing that I always kind of experience and made all my internships and current job, of course, very successful, I think, was that ever since the first day, or even before beginning my internships, I was always, people consider me as part of the staff. And that was very clear since the beginning. The expectations were clear. And, even though I was an intern, I had mentors and assigned editors, but I was always part of the staff, and I always felt like that. And I think that was always key for me to feel welcomed. One of the when I was in Science, and I was thinking of switching to science journalism or science writing in general, I think it was that I found a very welcoming community. Uh, I remember my first encounter with the community was at AAAS. I got a travel fellowship. Um, I got a travel fellowship to attend AAAS, and everybody was welcoming, and I think that has always been a feature of the science writing community. And moving forward, um, I think whether internships or just normal internships or also internship designs, especially for minority writers like Jeff is going to explain. I think um, one of the key things is just uh, having an honest talk about the abilities, the interests, uh, and the basically, yeah, the beats or skills of the interns or new writers. Uh, I in all the places I've been, I come from Mexico. My first language is not English, uh, but I speak Spanish fluently, right? And I've always used that to my advantage, and all my editors have been very encouraging of that. Finding stories in Latin America, or talking to scientists in Mexico and Latin America, those are hidden stories, and I've always felt that I could go to them and instead of being like disencouraged about pursuing those stories, I've I've always encountered interest, and I think that's key. Um, I'm talking about English, for example. I've always been clear, like, hey, I'm very like fluent in English. I did grad school in English, but I'm still gonna make mistakes, and it's so I would maybe rely more heavily on you to correct those mistakes and help me out. That I might not be aware of them and just point them out, and I won't be mad. It actually helps me. So I think having those honest talks since the beginning have really helped me navigate the landscape, the internship landscape, and eventually land um, a really nice job where I've always felt welcomed, and also having those talks at the beginning help you out with maybe providing feedback and not feeling uh, put on the spot or feeling ashamed or providing feedback that sometimes might be hard or in certain topics about diversity in the newsroom. So I think that's what I wanted to kind of like lay out from my experience, um, but I'm happy to elaborate in any questions you may have.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rodrigo. I mean, that's great to hear that you had such a welcoming and great experience. I think that times are changing a little bit. I mean, just before we move on, I mean, I remember in grad school, I mean, I'm born and brought up here in America, but I would have professors who would treat me like English wasn't my first language and only ask me questions about India, which is offensive, and me and the other person who was also not white would also get similar questions. So it was just kind of these very uncomfortable attitudes when then they criticize your writing. It's like, this is my first language, even though I look not like that. So I'm very, very happy to hear that you've had different experiences and in the Q&A, talking about what were particular things that helped bring that out. All right, so let's move on to Jeff Mervis. Jeff, you've been doing the AAAS Diverse Voices internship. So tell us a little bit about your role in that.
Okay, well, if you'd like me to go, I don't want to do back-to-back science, but so this is a program, and Nick is an alumna of it, that we've been running for about 15 years. And so I wanted to just say briefly what it was, and then also mention a new wrinkle that we've added this year, and then a couple of sort of general comments about what we've learned. So the program is for undergraduates, which makes it different than most science internship programs. I think right off the bat, our feeling was that we wanted to find people who were committed to journalism to the extent that an undergraduate could be committed to anything career-wise, and then give them an opportunity to learn about science. And so that's another difference in our program. The interns aren't necessarily science majors and have had varying amounts of science. It's obviously an advantage if you've done research or if you've done a literature search, or at least you understand, what peer-reviewed research is, but it's not required. And again, our feeling was we wanted to reach as broad an audience as possible. And we didn't want to, prematurely narrow the pool to people who are already committed to science writing. So those are sort of the two basic principles. What we've learned, sort of the issue for us, science, obviously, we have a reputation. We're, considered a prestigious publication. We sort of feel like we know what our readers want and how to give it to them. But I think, we recognized a long time ago that we were not providing them with as much, sufficient perspective, because of the pool of writers was not reflecting the diversity of science as a whole. So the question then becomes for us, and I think for other publications that are largely still, staffed by white majority culture reporters and editors, is what do we feel we can offer candidates, with diverse voices? Number one. Number two, what is it that they need? And number three, sort of, can we deliver that? And can they get what they feel they need in a 10 or 11 week experience? So that, I think, has been an ongoing issue, which we're still trying to refine. And I'd be happy to talk more about that in the Q&A. And if there's people in the audience who are like Nick alumni or are interested in it, that would be great. The last thing is this year we decided to add a component, which we probably should have been doing since the beginning, and that's the concept of having a mentor for each of the interns as well as a supervisor. Rodrigo can talk about that as well if he'd like, because he has volunteered to be one of the mentors. So we've assigned each of the interns a mentor, and we're still trying to figure out what that person's role is. I think, most generally, it's another person that intern can go to apart from their supervisor with whatever they feel they need, whether it's questions that they're not comfortable raising directly, whether it's just another perspective, or whether it's something specific, relating to the program that they're just would be more comfortable talking to someone who's not directly in line. The reason I said, this seems kind of obvious. We realized belatedly we probably should have been doing that for all of our interns. We have a 6-month internship. We have different levels. And in fact, could make the case that maybe we should be doing that for staff as well. Certainly for staff that hasn't been on the magazine for that long. But we're trying to do it, again, with the recognition that, there's probably an additional component that we can offer minority interns, even if we're not crystal clear on what that is. So let me leave it at that, and again, be happy to expand on any of those issues in the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's great. Yeah, I'm interested to hear, how your program has changed throughout the years too, in terms of incorporating feedback, and we can talk about that in the Q&A session too. So you're a nice segue to your one of your alums, Nicholas St. Fleur.
Yes, yes. Hey there, everyone. I'm Nick St. Fleur. As mentioned, I did the internship program over at Science. It was called the Minority Science Writing Internship when I did it. I enjoyed that. It has a new name. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it was fantastic for me. It's what really showed me that you can do science journalism as as a real job, as opposed to just, something fun you're doing while you're in college or in the school newspaper. I realized, people are like, supporting themselves in this career path. So that was kind of eye-opening for me because I didn't realize, just how many science journalists there were out there, how different science journalists had different beats, how you can cover this, you can cover that. So, I mean, it was fantastic. And what I love to say to people is when I was at Science, it was in 2012. So this is when we landed the Curiosity rover on Mars. Which is fantastic. And the story I like to share, just for like interns, just for anyone, it's such a great experience. I remember being in the morning meeting, and we're going around and we're talking about how the rover is about to land, and the guy at the who was writing planetary sciences, Dick Kerr at the time, had said that he had written the story if Curiosity landed and everything was fine. But it was supposed to happen, later at night. So he said, I'm probably going to fall asleep. So if something bad happens, I want one of you interns to cover it. And I remember me and the other intern, a young woman named Chris Nell, we were looking at each other. We were just like, could you imagine? And I remember staying up all night with my reporter's notebook, kind of like, kind of cheering for humanity and whatnot, kind of hoping in the back of my head something might happen so I could write the story. Nothing happened. But I bring all this up because, those kind of opportunities for people who are new in science journalism are just so important, and they could really change your trajectory in kind of what you're hoping to do career-wise. So I owe a lot of gratitude to the internship program over at Science Mag. So STAT is actually just starting something similar. It's aimed at both undergrads and grad students looking towards diversifying science in the name of one of our colleagues who passed away, Sharon Bagley, who was just a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for breaking news. So congrats to STAT. We were all very happy about that. It was bittersweet, but they just started a internship program, a fellowship program for that. And I'm hoping that they take a lot of, notes from what science is doing. And I would say for institutions that have the ability to start one of these internship programs, it's really, especially one that focuses on bringing in writers from like diverse backgrounds, from LGBTQ communities, writers who might come from might have disabilities, from all of these different communities. I think that is one area that we can all, really improve on, but can also lead towards making us a more diverse community. Finding ways to fund such projects. What you call it. And one thing I got to give props to, I know that NASW provides I think it's like a $5,000 scholarship or something stipend for students trying to do internships over the summer. And I highly commend that effort, because as someone who's not that far from when I was interning, it's tough. It's really tough, especially in journalism, as many of you know. Before you can kind of really get your first job, you kind of have to go on the internship, I don't know, ladder. You have to intern here and then intern there and then intern somewhere else. I've done probably about I don't know, 6 or so. And for all people who are doing internships, but especially people from diverse communities, you want to make sure you have that kind of financial support so that they can move to DC or move to New York City and be able to afford to do these internships. I mean, now it's a bit different because of COVID and such, but yeah, I would say if there's any way you can really kind of support people at that entry level, that's really the kind of one of the biggest things that organizations can do. In terms of mentoring folk, just being there, just saying hi, and I say this as someone who is now on staff and realizes that when interns come in, I remember being an intern and thinking that, my summer lasted so long. I'm doing so much throughout this internship. When you're on staff and you see an intern come in, all of a sudden, it's like, hi. And then a week later, you're having your goodbyes and you don't even realize how fast it goes. So recognizing that, a new intern just came in, take the time to say, hey, let's grab coffee. Let's talk about this. Let's make them feel welcome. You really have to put in some of that extra effort, with any intern really, because oftentimes you're coming into these news organizations, especially now in COVID, not knowing anyone, and it could be very intimidating to go up to some people who might be some of your idols, some of your biggest, some of the best writers in their field, and like ask them questions. I remember when I was at the Times, I would make it a point whenever another young person came to the science desk or early career person to just grab coffee and talk to them and explain a little bit about, what this industry is like, kind of what editors are expecting, what you can do to really, not just be a good journalist, but be a good colleague. But also, I think being mindful that people are going through, a lot more than just what is happening at work. Being there to say like, hey, like a perfect example, one of my worst days at the Times, I remember, was when Dylan Roof, committed his massacre in Charleston. And I just remember being like, oh my God, this is like frightening. And I wish I had had more people kind of like ask me, hey, how are you doing? How are you thinking? Like, how are things? And then in the years that have gone by from that, wherever I'm working, whenever there's like a shooting of a Black person by a police officer, I don't know if people realize how much of an impact that has on your psyche and just in the workplace, especially as a Black person. And just realizing that, like, there are times when that happens and you just can't get any work done for like the whole day. Sometimes it could be 2 days, 3 days, because you're just thinking to yourself and you're just like, my goodness, like, that could have been me in whatever case scenario. And I'm always curious, not that I'm always curious, but I don't know if my white colleagues always recognize that, or recognize when you might be like, when a person of color or a Black person might be struggling with something happening more generally, more in the news in that respect. I'm very fortunate at STAT. They are very good at, asking you how you're doing. I remember when they were having the Derek Chauvin trial, and my editor checked into me and was like, just saying like, hey, how are your thoughts? Like, how are things going with you? And I know that was something small on his part, but that actually meant a whole lot to me. Just to realize that people are like recognizing that, you're a person and like what's happening in the news can really be affecting you. I know, I mean, especially now during COVID, I mean, goodness, just giving people allowances for struggling and offering people, that ear to just talk about things. So, I mean, this has to deal with not just like, your interns who come from, these diverse backgrounds, though I would say giving them a special, just making sure you're making yourself available for them is as helpful, is as helpful a thing that you can do without even realizing just how much that means. So yeah, being attentive that, we cover the news, yeah, but that doesn't mean that the news itself isn't affecting us. So that's just a little bit of my spiel. I'm more than happy to kind of talk about questions and talk about any of these kind of things.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I was listening to the Work Life podcast by TED, and, there's an episode, there's kind of like these weird ads where they just kind of do good things that some companies are doing. And one of them was talking about how they kind of during, last June, they put together kind of a town hall, and it was very cathartic for a lot of the Black people at the organization being able to talk that out with other people. So I think it's great that we're seeing more and more like active roles and people doing that. So that's great to hear your experience at STAT. All right, for our last panelist, we have Chanapa. Are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, hi.
Perfect. All right, so take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's Chanapa, and I apologize again for this phone situation. I can't see y'all, and y'all can't see me, but now you have my cell number and can text me. So yes, I work for the FDA, but before I worked for the machine, I was a science writer for a few universities, Johns Hopkins, the hospital comms office, and undergrad university comms office, and the University of Utah before that. In all the places I've worked, it's really been the norm that I'm the only person of color on the team or one of a couple in the whole office. In places where that wasn't the case, like the Johns Hopkins medicine team was really quite diverse. I'd be the only person of color in a lot of spaces, like interdepartmental meetings or, kind of work groups that have to intersect with other folks. I want to talk about how being the only person of color comes with a lot of experiences in being both singled out and being forgotten and silenced frequently. What I mean by that is, being singled out, having my name made fun of in meetings that has happened, or having people talk to me about random countries in Asia because they think, it's, quote, my corner of the world. But at the same time, the kind of being silenced, not being put forward for glamour projects, getting a disproportionate share of housekeeping work, being forgotten on meeting invites regularly, just generally being rendered invisible. I think that being rendered invisible point is what, I'm going to touch on, and what I think, I want to talk about what I think could be done about it to make a better work environment. Because I think we've gotten to this point, right, in our society where everyone generally agrees that diversity in the workplace is a good thing. It's an important thing. But how do you foster an environment that kind of nurtures that diversity, that makes people feel actually included? Because being there isn't enough if it's a damaging environment. And more often than not, that damage is incredibly subtle. It's in the form of omission. And when you're a person of color, you're already used to doing these really complicated mental calculations of, am I being too sensitive? Is it worth it to say anything? What would I say and to whom? And what will actually come out of it? Would it, hurt me more to actually stand up for myself? And those mental calculations become a lot more complex when you're early in your career and you're trying to build a name for yourself. You're still figuring out how to navigate the workplace, and the stakes are just generally higher. I would say you need really active, conscious efforts to combat those seemingly passive acts of discrimination. In my experience, it's made all the difference for me when people either spoke up for me or people in leadership, my mentors, my bosses, gave me the tools to speak up for myself, either by leading by example or coaching me on what my options even were. And I have a really good example of that is when I was at Hopkins Medicine, my grand boss, my boss's boss, Audrey, is an Asian woman, and she once experienced kind of that being rendered invisible, and she told the team about it. She had an appointment at the hospital, like a personal appointment, and noticed that the front desk person treated her differently than the white patients coming in. She didn't get greeted, the receptionist didn't make eye contact or exchange pleasantries, and it's really easy to let those things slide, but she actually wrote to the head of the department about it. And I don't know exactly what she said, but the act of her doing something about it has really left an impact on me. It's kind of validated that discomfort I feel when the same happens to me. And, unfortunately it happens a lot, and let me know, this isn't okay and something should be done about it. And it gave me the confidence to speak up for myself when I went through a long stint at a previous job where I was kind of ignored for a while. So I would say if you're supervising, mentoring someone, you're in a position of power, it's really important to set that example. And even though I'm still early in my career, when I've had the chance to mentor others, I try to do the same. Like there was once a junior staff member that started, and she mentioned how no one ever says her name correctly, and she felt really hesitant about correcting people, and she always just let it slide. And, just me saying that, no, that's not okay. And you're allowed to say something about it. You should say something about it, and how people react to the boundaries you set and the respect you deserve and request shouldn't be the concern. So I would say, in the workplace, one, you need people to know what to look out for, because really often it's not being called like a slur in an email. No one's going to say, I don't want this Asian woman or this Black man on my team, but it's a more minor thing. It's knowing to look at the distribution of work. It's who gets to ask to be the face of a project versus who gets asked to make an Excel sheet for that project. You know, it's who gets a seat at the table and who doesn't even know what room the table is in. And oftentimes the conversation about diversity could be so surface level, like diet diversity or diversity light. You know, people talk about racial slurs and like really obvious acts of aggression, but I think there needs to be more awareness about these more nuanced things to look for. You know, how do you look at lost leadership opportunities and unequal social capital? And then you need people to speak up and make it clear that it's not okay. You know, there's been a lot of times where I've told people and they acknowledged it, but then they just kept going and supporting the systems in place that allow it to happen. I don't think that's allyship. That's not fostering a diverse environment. In terms of concrete things, I'm not sure how I feel about implicit bias trainings because I don't think they accomplish much. I think workplaces should really prepare for, you know, defending people against these perpetrators, these experiences, and you need awareness and a concentrated effort on an individual and a group level to kind of assess, why do these things happen? Why is there this pattern? There should be structures in place to keep track of, you know, who's doing what at what frequency. You know, so oh, why does this person always get to lead a project, but this other person who's in the exact same role and has the same performance is always asked to make lists? I think having those things in black and white would kind of pinpoint inequities more clearly and make opportunities more equal for everyone. And that is all I have.
I don't think that's all. You said quite a lot. You said a lot of really, really great stuff. Thank you so much, Chanapa. I mean, so what, you know, you say a lot of really interesting things, a lot of which I've also experienced in my own capacity. I think one of the hardest things about being a minority and an early career person is you don't know if what you're experiencing is because you're inexperienced or because of the way you look. And I think that, like, I would psych myself out thinking, oh, it's because I'm not experienced. It's because I'm not experienced. But then, you know, as I got more experienced and I got, you know, some kind of affirmation that my work was good, I still just kind of said, oh, it's because I'm not that good. I'm not experienced, until one day, you know, I'm like, there's something wrong here. I don't know what's going on, but there's something wrong. So I actually documented for the past, you know, however many months or whatever, all the stories that I got to do, how hard they were compared to my colleagues, and why was I getting less? Why was I not producing as much work from people? And it became quite shocking to me that I was like, wait, this isn't just in my head. The numbers tell me this. So, you know, I told my superior this. I was like, okay, there's something weird going on here. It might be they don't know that they're doing this because the people, you know, that you are around, you know, they have, for the most part, you know, they have good intentions. We like to think that. So it's something that they don't even know that they're doing necessarily. And then I remember, you know, then sometimes colleagues would say something to me and I was like, oh, you notice this too. So it's not just me. So I think that talking to someone is really helpful. And we have a question here by Amber that I want to get to in a second, and go ahead and type in your questions starting now or, you know, whenever. But kind of going off of this idea of having someone to talk to and mentorship. I mean, everyone here has talked about someone they can go to. And, you know, Jeff, you're starting this mentorship program. So maybe each one of you can kind of, I mean, Chanapa, you gave some very good characteristics. So you don't need to go again if you don't want to. But for each person, if you want to talk about, you know, what were things that you really appreciated when you talked to somebody when they were mentoring you? And I guess, Jeff, like, what are things that you tell your mentors that you want them to do? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I mean, throughout my career, I would say I've had many mentors, and a few of them have looked like me, and that's fine. That's great. I find my mentors, sometimes it can be a natural fit. It's your editor who's really trying to help you out, you know, show you the ropes, help you, you know, better understand how to craft a story, how to get the information you need from sources, how to reach out. I would say some of my mentors are just other reporters who I've admired, whose work I wish I could do. and reaching out to them and asking them, about their work, about their process is something that I've found very fruitful. The other thing I want to kind of mention, somewhat related to the question, but kind of related to what I was touching on in terms of, being proactive when it comes to reaching out to like interns and trying to provide them with advice and such, is you also have to remember your interns are trying really hard to do like, good work, but to make good impressions, sometimes working through their lunch period, sometimes working these long hours to the point that they themselves may not make the time to, network, to reach out to people, to reach out to other reporters. So I would say if this is something you care about, make sure you're making that time as well, because they may not necessarily have the time because they're just working so hard. And sometimes they feel like, oh goodness, I can't talk to this person because I got to finish this story. I got to do that. I know I ran into that. And there are many people who I wish I had spent more time speaking to or reaching out to or getting advice from. But I always, work through my lunch breaks kind of thing. Yeah, and I think also organizing things where interns or younger or earlier career journalists can meet each other, but also just, talk. I think that's kind of facilitated that you could put together, whether those be brown bag lunches, whether those be little seminars. If you could talk about, yeah, a good thing you could do is you could have, if a reporter does like a really great job on a story, like something really fantastic, have them do a seminar, like a lunch thing with the interns, explaining how they found their sources, why they went to this person, why they quoted this person, how they got the idea, deconstruct a story like that. Some things I wish I had more of were really those sitting downs and going through the stories. And I believe Jeff used to do that with me in the early days. Like, we would go through stories together. But you could do that at any stage with early career folks, like line by line saying, hey, like, so this is what I liked about your story. This is what you could improve on. Because those are just, those are great things that interns will take with them. And that's one way to really foster that mentor-mentee relationship.
Yeah, I think that, you touched on several things that we try to do. We can always do more of the brown bags, focusing on a specific story, focusing on sort of nuts and bolts things, how do you do an interview? How do you deal with reluctant sources? Any, those kinds of topics, fact checking. We have a weekly tea, and we're trying to make an effort. I think this is the second year we've had to do the internship remotely, and it's much harder because you don't have the serendipitous interactions, and you also don't have well, let's just go down the hall and talk to that person. You've got to set up a Zoom meeting, or even if you do, Slack channel or email, it's going to be much more scripted and then stilted. And so we're trying to figure out how to lower those barriers to entry. And again, that's one of the things that we hope the mentor can do, to serve, to shadow to the intern, to be able to shadow the reporter on an interview, to go over the interview afterwards, in addition to sort of the more, formal kind of instruction. So it is all of the above, but you make a great point, Nick, in terms of time. You have to realize that, yeah, the intern may not have the time or may not feel that they want to intrude. And so we encourage the reporters to reach out, not to wait for the intern to say, gee, I'd like to talk to you about this, but have it be the other way around. I thought you might be interested in talking about this, or as you said, let's grab coffee. And that makes it open-ended. Then you don't have to have an agenda.
Yeah, I think one thing that I learned, now I'm mentoring people, right? But one thing that I really learned having great mentors, and one of them is in the audience, Siri Carpenter, for example, is just at the beginning I came to my internships with this idea of like, oh, I have to well, I don't want to say like pass as white, but like, I have to really excel at my English and kind of like don't talk a lot about my background. But then, my greatest mentors are the ones who are really take the time to know me and ask me, they might not be familiar with my country, my language, my customs, holidays, whatever, food, and they really take interest in that. And that kind of is really validating, uh, because it's like, I want to get to know you, get to where you're coming from. And I found that that is really, really helpful to establish a conversation. And also, it's so much productive in terms of stories. For example, like stories that sometimes I might have thought that wouldn't work for a publication. I just like, hey, I have this idea. Do you think this might work? And they're like, oh yeah, I haven't talked, we haven't like done that story in a while. Let's do it, And that has given me kind of like the confidence to speak out and propose more things that I guess in the past I wouldn't have. Um, so in terms of mentoring, yeah, I think that really makes a difference. I mean, again, it doesn't have to be like you don't have to become best friends, but also just get to know them, their background, and kind of like how they came to work with you, right? And also what they expect from you, as well, and have that kind of like safe zone, like Jeff said, to pose dumb questions, because the rule is like there are no dumb questions. You can ask about anything, uh, and that way, those things really help you out to construct the basis to move on from early career to mid career.
Great. We have a question from the audience, Amber, and I want to expand a little bit on her question. She says, how do you reach the undergraduates for them to hear about your internship? But, I think another question to kind of expand on that is, how do you make sure that you're hitting groups that might be underrepresented? And yeah, there are specific like diversity internships, but I mean, I don't know, a lot of people in this audience might just have regular internships. But like, how can you make sure that you're targeting so you have a diverse array?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And some of what my thoughts on this come from watching my partner who does recruitment over at Stanford to get people into their graduate program there, and she goes to schools all over the country. And even though she's at a prestigious university like Stanford, she makes sure that she's not just looking at brand name schools. And I think that's something we need to do more of at journalism. And it's something as someone who, I mean, in all honesty, I came from a brand name school for undergrad. I went to Cornell, and to realize just how many people have that kind of, I don't know, background in journalism was kind of eye-opening, really, to realize that, it can be a very elitist institution. And how we need to do way, way better when it comes to, just getting people from different backgrounds, but also different schools and such. Like I know I've been in places where every other person went to like Columbia J School, or wrote for their paper wrote for the Crimson, or wrote for some of these papers. And I just feel like we as a profession, not just science journalism, but we as a profession could be doing a better job of reaching into schools where they may not have a journalism program, or they may not have a top rated newspaper, but they have students who are interested, who are curious about science, students who want to learn more, or students who are interested in doing science, who are scientists themselves, but realize I'm not having this much fun at the bench. My curiosities are way broader than this. I want to learn about science journalism. And like I said, if it wasn't for Jeff's internship, I wouldn't have really realized that you can do this as a career. So I mean, more of those opportunities, but you could also reach out to editor-in-chiefs of newspapers at all of these different schools and say, hey, would you be we want to put together some kind of presentation, especially now that we have so many virtual seminars like this, our publication, I'm just going to pick a random one, like Science Mag or Scientific American. We want to reach out to more communities or whomever, more college students. We're going to put together a little seminar like this, talking about what it's like to be a science journalist. And we're going to probably, reach out to all these different schools and have people come in, and then just telling people, I think that's the biggest thing, telling people, but also look outside of, just like the top tier schools when it comes to recruiting people for your internships and this. Oh, and another thing, and I know, Jeff's internship asked for this, or I believe it asked for it, or at least I think it did when I was asking for it. And I know a lot of different internships also ask for this, but I would highly recommend maybe waiving or just getting rid of the recommendation that students have 2 letters of like recommendation from an editor, because you'd be surprised at how tough that can be and how restrictive that can be as well. Sometimes you do good work, maybe you didn't get along with your editor despite doing good work, or maybe you just don't have someone who could speak to your work. I think if you feel like you need to have an outside like opinion from someone who could speak to your work, maybe require that of like the finalists, but don't make that, because there are just too many barriers like that are preventing people from even applying in the first place, and you might be missing out on some really good candidates. So that's just a small aside.
Those are good points. We have struggled with outreach, and we need to do more. When I first started the program, I actually did travel. We identified, minority serving institutions, HBCUs. We just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to continue that on an annual basis. We're trying to do that more now, hooking up with, chairs of journalism programs at HBCUs and MSIs. But if anyone's interested in helping us spread the word, that would be great. And obviously it would be better still if we could do it in person. If we could go to job fairs, if they still have those. But again, it's a part of it is a question of bandwidth. Part of it is a question of commitment, obviously. If you feel it's important enough, then you figure out how to get the resources. And little secret, Nick, we don't rule out anyone if they don't have the 2 letters of recommendation, but it turns out that it can be really valuable for people, especially not, from an institution that isn't as well known, because then you can get some personal information.
So making it optional, I think.
But I think you're right. It is, I know, and I can tell that some, applicants have really struggled to find someone, they find someone who doesn't really know them. And I think we try to factor that in and realize, well, they just may not be in a program where they have the support that they need, and we don't want to penalize them further by saying, you don't have great letters of recommendation, so we're not going to consider you. That's a good point.
We have a lot of great questions. Rodrigo, I'm going to have you speak, but maybe in your answer, you can also incorporate a little bit of the work that you're doing with the NASW diversity program.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention exactly that you can always lean on organizations who are doing great efforts. NASW, for example, the diversity committees working with the education committee to have some kind of outreach programs to HBCUs about science writing as a career, for example. And we also have ties with other organizations like the Hispanic journalists, Black journalists, Asian journalists. We have we waive, for example, the entry fee to awards or the registration for science writers, the annual meeting. So these are, beyond internships, these are things that organizations are also helping out. And if you want, if you have an internship or a program, you can always lean on the organizations to spread the word to other groups that work directly with minority science writers or potential science writers. So I think that's a good avenue as well.
Great. Chanapa, we have a question for you. Do you have suggestions for how to build a mechanism into early career training that would give people the confidence to speak up? Especially for people who are new on staff, it can be hard to know who to go to and whether you risk getting in trouble for speaking out. Would it be helpful, for instance, for staff members to have a mentor, not just interns?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I would say setting up a buddy system for people that are new. is always a good idea, both for onboarding, learning the logistics of a workplace, but then it gives you someone to speak to as well. And then maybe that person doesn't end up being your eventual person that you trust, to speak about these things, but you can kind of gauge, based on your relationship with them, gauge maybe who would be the best person or what would be the right way to speak up in the space you're in.
Great. If anyone else has something to add, feel free. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
I should say, just, and this may be unique to science and AAA because it's part of AAAS, but as many of you know, AAAS also has a mass media fellows program, and these are people who are completing their PhDs, or at least are in graduate school and are thinking, well, maybe I don't want to go to the bench, maybe I do want to get into science journalism. That's run by another person in a different division, but we piggyback on their orientation and then their poster session at the end. And we also make our interns part of their network. It's a much larger number of mass media fellows. So in the course of the summer, they're free to interact with 15 or 20 other people who are doing internships. They're not in the same place, even when we were all together. But some years that's worked out really well. And it's given our interns a larger community.
Great. All right, this next question is interesting. So let's say your organization is really interested in starting a diversity internship program, but doesn't have a very positive work culture. And I'm just going to say this isn't there, but maybe positive work culture means like they don't think that it's going to work, or maybe they don't have enough time to make sure that it goes to the way you want it to. How can you steer the newsroom in the right direction despite the negative newsroom culture? What are key pitfalls to avoid when starting a program aimed at more diverse candidates?
I don't have the answer, but I just want to say that in my experience, a lot of the pitfalls about in diversity doesn't come from your direct boss or the newsroom. Sometimes they're part of a larger organization, and if the whole organization is not on board about diversity, there's going to be a lot of miscommunication or pitfalls. And so I experienced this, for example, when I was part of the newsroom, and that was part of a larger organization. And the IT, for example, like there were certain things that didn't sit well with me. They were not because I was averse, but for example, my email included the term intern in it, for example, and I felt singled out, for example. Again, this didn't have to do with my background or anything. It was just like I was emailing people to get comment, and I felt kind of like bad that my email said intern, and I just felt self-conscious that they wouldn't get back to me because of that. And that didn't have to do with my bosses or the newsroom. It was just like IT, or so. I think a lot of the efforts that have that come with that have to be from the top management and permeate throughout the whole company or organization. And I think that's really key. So it has to do with changing the culture. And I couldn't stress more to have specific diversity training for the whole company, because that really helps at least bring change.
Jeff, Nick, or Chanapa, do you have answers for what are key pitfalls to avoid when starting a program aimed at diverse candidates?
We're just starting one over at STAT. My editor, Gideon Gill, is heading that up. So I could totally report back on what some of the challenges that he faces will be, but I feel like some of the big challenges are, well, going back to the question, and this is actually a really interesting one, and it's one that I find I struggle with. And I feel like this isn't just a journalism question. This is definitely a broadage question. I know I hear the same thing in academia as well. When you're recruiting people, should you ethically be recruiting people into environments that they may find hostile or may not be welcoming for them? And it's a tough debate. It really is, because how do you break down some of these structural problems without having people who are willing to, address it by bringing more of those people in? But those issues, sometimes they're so ingrained. It's tough. And maybe this will resonate with some of our some of the folk who are watching, who are scientists. I hear daily not daily, but I hear very regularly people who do their PhDs and leave academia because of some of these structural problems. And I would say similar ones definitely exist in journalism. Of course they do. Like we as journalists are reckoning with them, on a ever since really the George Floyd protests. We've been really reckoning with the way that media approaches certain stories, approaches finding sources, approaches all of these things. So we definitely have that big problem. But how to address it? It's tough. It's really tough, because how do you call someone out without, you don't want them, because when you call someone out for like a microaggression or something, they can get very defensive. And if they have any particular kind of like power over you, sometimes you just suck it up, really. So bringing someone into a work environment that might be, it's tough. I think the best way to do it is to speak with people who have power, who are open, but also willing to stand for change. Really identify those people who are not just giving, dare I say, lip service, but are actually doing the change, and have those honest conversations about what needs to be done. Because there are definite people who are passionate about this more so, and aren't just using diversity as like a buzzword, or like putting out a statement because every organization put out a statement. The other thing I would say for people who are on the other side of things, like the managerial portion, literally like talk to your Black employees, talk to your people of color employees, talk to your LGBTQ employees, but talk to them in such a way that you can have honest, maybe like anonymous conversations. I guarantee you, any organization you're a part of, there are people there who know the problems, who can easily lay out the problems and easily provide fixes for the problems. They just don't want to speak out because their jobs might be on the line. So if you could find an avenue, or they don't want to step on the wrong kind of toes kind of thing. And this is definitely a very real issue everywhere, I would say, within journalism, because when I have friends who are of similar, whether it be backgrounds to me or similar areas in their career, when we get together and we talk about how we could fix these things. We talk about what needs to be done. These conversations are happening. It's just, are they being done? Are these conversations, are the people who have the power to change it, are they being included? So I would say the best thing you can do is start at the beginning, which is find some way where you can anonymously have the people in your organization just lay out, no holds bar, what the problems are, what they think needs to be changed. And it has to be anonymous. It really does. You got to figure that out. And that's the only way you'll be able to really get like a list of what needs to change. Because there are a lot of people in all of these organizations and all of these places that really do care, but they're afraid to speak out. So yeah, if you could find a way where they're protected and they could really address the problems, I think that would be the first step.
Chanapa, I'm wondering if you have a perspective on this question too, as being oftentimes, like myself, the only non-white person in the workplace. What are some ways that you try to change the attitudes of the people there to be more encompassing to change?
Oh gosh, yeah. I didn't speak up earlier because my initial reaction to the question was just to throw it all away, to not do it, because it is really difficult. Like Nick said, is it right to bring someone into an environment that is problem and hostile. I don't think it is, but then you don't have those people in the space at all. And then there are pipeline problems. Yeah, I would echo what Nick said, having a way to anonymously provide that kind of feedback, and then just being honest. Like, I guess thinking me personally, if I, had been at Hopkins and I were trying to invite someone into a diversity internship or fellowship, whatever, and, I knew there were problems, I would just be straight up about it. Be like, these, we'd like you here, but there are real issues here and we're trying to make it better, but we'll work through this together, and I will be that mentor, I will be that ally for you. And I've done that when a little bit, when I've seen problems in the workplace and we're interviewing for people and I have the opportunity, maybe the people up the food chain won't like to hear that, but I'm pretty honest when I can and blunt when I can be, to be like, this is what you'd be stepping into.
Yeah. Rodrigo, did you have something?
Well, I just want to say that we are a tight-knit community and we talk to each other. So, we give advice and it's just for the best for each organization to provide the best work environment. And if we see, I've had instances when, where word gets out that a place is not really treating their employees or freelancers well. And I've gotten word like, I wanted to apply to that place, and I'm like, no, I don't want to go through that, and then I cross it out of my internship application list, and that has happened. So I think, and I know I would assume editors know that, so it's also in their best interest.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, that Chanapa is saying, like, these are the issues that we have. And, maybe if there's not enough diversity or minorities in that office, like Rodrigo said, the community's small. So, reach out to other people at other outlets. And, if you see someone, you tell your intern, hey, if you want to talk to someone, talk to Nicholas St. Fleur, so you can also reach outside of your bubble there. All right, Emily, so I think we started a little late, but now we're maybe about at an hour. We have one question left that's like kind of general. Do we have time for it, or should we cut it off?
I think if you want to do one more, that's fine with me, if that's okay with the panelists.
Sure.
All right, this one's kind of this is like a nice debriefer. Like, any advice for journalists changing their career focus to science journalism?
It's very possible. You can totally do it. One of the best science journalists I know was at one point a theater critic. Yeah, just, it depends. Obviously, it depends on what outlet you're writing for. It depends on if you're a freelancer. It depends on certain things. If you're writing for an outlet that has a science desk, talk to the editor, grab coffee with them, and literally just say, hey, I'd be interested in writing for you. This is some of my past work. Here's a story idea I have. So coming with some pitches, some ideas, especially if you could start off slow with something that intersects whatever you're currently covering, and then do this. Like, say you are a theater critic. Look at how's the theater industry bouncing back from COVID, or what are vaccine rates like, amongst people on Broadway, like just things like that to get your foot into the door. And then if you're a freelancer, freelancing is, I wouldn't say it's easier in that respect. I would just say, just pitch science outlets. If you're a journalist, you already have this background, you can just say, hey, I'm interested in writing more about science. This at least is what I would think could work. And I think, people are pretty, receptive to that, I would imagine. But yeah, I would say go for it. Follow your curiosities.
Great answer. All right. Rodrigo is posting something for the open notebook, which I think will be great. All right. So we're at the end of our time. I want to thank all of the panelists for all their great insight. I'm pretty sure that you can Google all of us and you can email us if you have additional questions at our outlets. So thank you again to everybody. I'll give the silent applause to everybody. But thank you, Emily, for having us. Thank you again to Tina Say for organizing this. And I'll take it back to Emily.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the thanks to everybody who took part and everybody who watched. And we will put the recording on our YouTube channel at some point in the near future. So if there's anything you want to go back to, if you missed anything, you'll be able to do that. So great. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Hey.
Bye-bye.